Hey everybody, it is Monday, April 7th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to in what is set to be another very eventful week here, Jill.
Yes, Moshe, the future of our economic system, between the tariffs, the stock market, all seem to be at a crossroads right now.
Yeah, there's been a lot of developments hour by hour here. I'm headed down to Washington today for some briefings on all of this. And it comes as the hotels are filling up in Washington, Jill, as a number of world leaders are making their way for meetings to try to make some deals here after that huge tariff announcement last week.
Okay, so let's get to the headlines. It's set to be another very ugly day on Wall Street as President Trump's nearly universal 10% tariffs took effect over the weekend. Meanwhile, dozens of countries are looking to talk to the president to try to negotiate down some of these steeper reciprocal tariffs that are set to roll out on Wednesday.
And then you have other countries like China that have said, we'll see your tariff and raise our own.
And for the first time in this presidency, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets this weekend in all 50 states to oppose President Trump's policies. Tragically, another child has died in Texas because of the measles outbreak. RFK Jr. made a trip to the epicenter of the outbreak as there are tons of questions about whether the government is doing enough. Back in Washington, a judge ordered the United States to bring back a Maryland migrant who was wrongly deported to an El Salvador prison, and a Justice Department lawyer could lose his job for suggesting it may have been wrong to deport him. In sports, the NCAA women's national champs have been crowned, and the men's championship game tips off tonight. There was also some NHL history made over the weekend. And finally, at the Philadelphia Zoo, two nearly 100-year-old tortoises become parents. And Moshe, I thought having kids in my 40s felt old.
Though we will tell you what this means by Galapagos tortoise standards, Jill. They live a long time, these turtles.
Yeah, not sure if the turtles have sleepless nights or not in those first few months. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Yes, we'll tell you why today, Jill, is National Beer Day. Got its name actually when alcohol was banned for those few years here in the U.S.
All right, let's start with the fallout from the tariffs that President Trump announced last week. It's set to be another very ugly day on Wall Street. The markets already lost about 10% of their value over just 2 days last week. It was the worst week in 5 years. Trillions in value were wiped out in a matter of hours. And if the stock market futures that we're seeing as of Sunday night stay consistent when the market opens at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time on Monday, we could be in for another nosedive. Investors were looking for signs over the weekend on whether or not perhaps this was just the beginning of a negotiation for President Trump and perhaps signs that some of these reciprocal tariffs might actually come down or go away. But investors not getting the news that they were looking for this weekend.
No, at least not as of late on Sunday night. Trump posted over the weekend, had a couple posts, one where he called on people to hang tough, two where he called the tariffs a beautiful thing that people will realize how beautiful they are at some point. He said this is part of an economic revolution. On Air Force One, on his way back to Washington Sunday night, he was asked by reporters about it. He said, I don't want anything to go down in reference to the stock market, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something. It's a reference basically to the trade deficit, the feeling that Trump has had. And Trump's been an advocate of tariffs for decades, which is why some are saying, like, why were you surprised, any of you in the market or CEOs, that Trump did this? He's been calling for tariffs since the 1980s. He has an issue with the fact that most U.S. manufacturing has moved abroad over the course of the past 70 or so years. And he wants it to come back here, and he wants other countries to buy as much stuff as we buy from them. The trade deficit, which is a very tall order, given how expensive U.S. products are, given how little we make in comparison to the Chinese, the Vietnamese, and others, and the fact that consumer spending, cheap goods, core driver of growth here in the U.S. So he is trying to basically overhaul the entire economy, the entire global economy here. And so they were hoping it was going to just be a negotiation, but you did see a couple of his advisors out over the weekend saying, you know, you've been taking advantage of us for a long time, is the feeling that you've been bad actors around the world. So this is not the kind of thing you can just negotiate away in a few days or weeks. So effectively pretending that this is going to be here for a while. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, saying the tariffs are not going to be postponed. These are the big significant ones that are set to come out on Wednesday.
Moshe, I've been trying to watch some of the market analysts and traders to get their take. Jim Cramer from CNBC, his show on Friday night, he talked about 3 possibilities that could happen right now. He said the first is that we could see something like we saw with the pandemic, where the markets had a really quick fall and then bounced back really quickly. The second is we could see something like with the dot-com bubble back in 2000, where there was kind of a reshuffling and it took a little bit longer. Or it could go the way of 1987, Black Friday. Stocks plunged 22% in one day. Markets really crashed. And he's not ruling out any of those, actually. And he was just saying it depends on, to your point, what happens with these tariffs and the way that investors are feeling about it. So we'll see what happens on Wall Street. In the meantime, countries around the world are scrambling to get FaceTime with President Trump. They are trying to ease some of the pain from his administration's sweeping tariffs. Over the weekend, the baseline 10% tariff went into effect for nearly all countries on Earth. But there are still a few days left for countries that face those steep reciprocal tariffs that are, in some cases, 3 to 5 times higher than that, set to go into effect on Wednesday. And so some countries are trying to get some FaceTime with President Trump to negotiate before then. The U.S. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett told ABC News more than 50 countries have already reached out to the United States to begin trade talks to try to negotiate down those tariffs on their imports. The UK, which was hit with that baseline 10% tariff, has said it will try to negotiate. UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer wrote in the Telegraph newspaper that securing a trade deal with the United States is a priority. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington today for a meeting with Trump to talk about the 17% tariffs that Trump put on Israel. The head of Taiwan's National Security Council, also in Washington, the Prime Minister of Japan, which faces a 24% tariff, had also expressed an interest in having a phone call with President Trump. And on Sunday, Vietnamese leaders met with American leaders to delay the deadline for those reciprocal tariffs until they could at least discuss a deal. Trump put a 46% tariff on Vietnam. The United States is Vietnam's biggest export market. It's where most of our shoes and other clothing comes from, which, Moshe, is interesting because a lot of factories, a lot of companies, in seeing the tensions between the U.S. and China, tried to diversify and make some of their factories in Vietnam, thinking that that would be a safer bet against this type of thing. Meanwhile, a tariff is set to decimate the Vietnamese economy and set to raise the cost of a lot of things for Americans. Meanwhile, China has instead responded with counter tariffs of its own. China's foreign ministry on Friday announced a 34% tariff on all goods imported from the U.S., starting on April 10th.
For reference here, going into last week, the U.S. and China each had about 20% tariffs on one another. We had 20% tariffs on them. They had 20% tariffs on us. So now with the U.S. raising 34% on top of that, we're now at a 54% tariff against the Chinese. The Chinese response was, cool, we'll do the same thing. And so they announced their counter tariffs late on Friday. And remember, China, this is significant. They're one of our largest trading partners. A lot of our cheap goods come to us from China, parts. The number of American small businesses do their production in China. It's a place where they're very efficient. They have a lot of scale. They have a lot of factories, a lot of cheap products. You know, they're basically the factory of the world. So significant here. The Chinese are like, we're not playing around here. We would have appreciated negotiation here. But the announcement of the tariffs, we're going to just counter you. And this trade war goes back to the first Trump term here. I mean, we've had issues with the Chinese in terms of the trade practices for years, going back to multiple administrations. The things really escalated in the first Trump term as he sought to call them out on a few things. In fact, a number of the Trump tariffs in the first term, Biden actually extended through his time in office, and now Trump is taking them across the board. And typically what they do with tariffs is they try to be strategic and hit certain types of products where they feel that the Chinese or other countries are behaving inappropriately and hurting specific industries. This across the board thing, this is what has really shocked the system, shocked the world, shocked the markets. That 10% tariff over the weekend, 10% on everything, basically from every country on earth. And so you even have Republicans, allies of President Trump, who are calling it a tax on Americans, saying that basically we just raised the price of everything coming into America by 10%. A lot of this stuff are things that we can produce. Think coffee, 99% of our coffee comes from abroad. and other items that might take years, if ever, to move their manufacturing here to the US. I mean, think about things like the iPhone, which costs about $1,000. Produced in the US, we're talking about $3,500 or $4,000 iPhone. A $500 TV produced in the US could cost as much as $2,000 or above. A 10-pack of socks that we pay about $10 for at Walmart or Target, that 10-pack could be $40 or $50 if produced here in the US. So a significant shift here that we're talking about, especially as the president talks about moving manufacturing here. We've seen the manufacturing decline from about World War II through today. And so you see that down curve over time. And you do see that there is a parallel as countries get richer, and this applies to Western Europe, applies to a number of other developed countries around the world, you tend to do less manufacturing, and manufacturing moves to poorer countries around the world. Effectively here, what the president's trying to do is change larger trend lines that we've seen going over a century here. And a large question people are asking is, even if manufacturing moves here, who's doing those jobs? At what costs? Are we able to produce, T-shirts and all these various things that we depend on, foreign manufacturers to produce much more cheaply than we produce here. So you're going to see prices go up for toys, video games, computer parts, smartphones, furniture, a whole variety of things that the vast majority of it is produced abroad these days. One of the things we'll be watching for this week, and we already saw publicly a number of Republican allies of the president, Ted Cruz among them on Friday, saying this is a tax and we really hope this is just a negotiation here because this is really going to hurt Americans. We're basically playing with fire here, White House, and you're basically going to cause a recession here in the US and likely a global recession. Based on this move, just given the influence of the U.S. market. But for President Trump, so far, he does not appear to be backing down here. He says this is the wholesale change that he wants to see to the global economy. He believes that trade practices are unfair, even as people say that the majority of goods are made abroad, probably not going to relight manufacturing on a large scale. There's also not that much demand among Americans to go work in textile plants and produce electronics here. At the same time, the U.S. actually has a trade surplus when it comes to services. So businesses, financial firms, banking, a variety of things that aren't things you can hold in your hand, for instance, but are things that America does more of and exports to the world. So, we talked here about the markets here at the top, just historical figures here. The Dow hasn't posted back-to-back losses of more than 1,500 points ever. That included the 2,200 point shellacking on Friday. Another similar day would now put us on par with 1987. The S&P is pushing towards a 20% loss in just the past 2 months, 20% of its value overall. And so another notable thing here is there are a lot of Wall Street CEOs and various executives of business firms who are big fans of President Trump. They thought his deregulatory agenda, his pro-business agenda was going to be a very good thing for them. Which is why they were very much rallying ahead of the election and in the aftermath of the election, saying this is going to be great, for all of us. And we saw these record highs through February. So now they're sort of like, wait, this is real and this is going to last for a while. So I can't even imagine the phone calls happening right now between Wall Street executives and their old friend Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Howard Lutnick at Commerce, both Wall Street guys here, or who were on Wall Street before they went to the administration, what their friends and former business partners are saying to them. And so this is set to be one of the most consequential weeks in American political history and economic history. And we'll try to track it as it happens.
Moshe, one of the questions that I've gotten, and I think you're probably getting as well over on the Instagram account, is what should people be stocking up on? Is this like one of those situations where we should start to do some panic buying? Experts say it might make sense to stock up on some items, but warn against panic buying yourself into debt.
Yeah, super important, especially as we look at this instability in the market, to make sure you have a few months of savings to be able to cover certain costs. Basically the general rule of thumb here is, depending on how things go here, you should ensure that before you decide to spend it all on toilet paper or paper towels or whatever the hell people are panic buying these days, that you should have enough savings here to cover your basic monthly expenses for 3 to 6 months. If you got that, then go ahead and buy yourself a car. Though I'll add one more thing as far as a car purchases is with it looking very likely that car prices are set to go up between $4,000 and $8,000. One thing very quickly that will then go up out of that is used car prices. So watch the new car prices go up, and then very quickly the used car prices go up.
Going up even higher than they already were, because car prices were so elevated. Used cars and car prices were so elevated in the pandemic and hadn't really come down. It was like one of those really sticky things that car prices were still high. All right, over the weekend, we also saw the first real large-scale protests of the second Trump term. Though these aren't about tariffs specifically, hundreds of thousands of people gathered in about 1,200 cities across all 50 states on Saturday, opposing a broad swath of President Trump's actions, as well as the cuts and firings that Elon Musk has overseen. The mass demonstration was supposed to be as broad and politically diverse as possible, the theme being hands off. The messages were varied, including that the Trump administration is threatening healthcare, Social Security, and education. It's attacking marginalized people like trans people and immigrants. Some of the protesters say Trump is making things more difficult for the average American while benefiting himself and his rich friends. Several Democratic members of Congress joined in, urging people not to stand for what they called the administration's mismanagement and breaking with constitutional norms. Democratic Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin was at the demonstration in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. Organizers there say more than 100,000 people gathered at the National Mall. Raskin addressed the crowd. Here are some of what he had to say.
Our founders wrote a constitution that does not begin with "we the dictators." The preamble says, "We the people."
He also slammed Trump's sweeping tariffs as stupid. The protests were locally organized in partnerships with groups like Indivisible, Move On, and around 150 liberal organizations with a wide variety of agendas, including reproductive freedom, gun control, and racial justice. Many of these organizations were responsible for putting together protests during Trump's first term. They wanted to keep the message of this weekend's protests as broad as possible to encourage the biggest attendance, which they got. They're holding up handmade signs with all sorts of messages, from calling the Trump administration oligarchs to accusing Trump of fascism, to calling for the end of deportations. So a lot of grievances there.
A lot of grievances, a lot of creative signs. Jill, I saw one with a play on Tesla and Elon, that they would like to grab the White House by the Teslicles. Get it?
I mean, clever.
Yeah, there you go. It's the anyway. I digress. It's one of the first times we've seen mass resistance, or sort of mass resistance here to Trump's second term. Again, creativity points to some of the signage folks, but they're trying to really figure out their messaging here. And so while they say the merit of it is that we're protesting all elements of the Trump agenda, everything is nothing. At the same time, especially in comparison to that first Trump term, where you remember those first protests, those days, within days of him taking over, the pink hats and the mass protests. And we just haven't seen that this go around, at least until this weekend, sort of some grassroots resistance, etc. The Democratic Party doesn't really have a leader, and they have various messages too. But increasingly, they're seeing that as Trump's poll numbers start to come down here, and that's an interesting thing to watch, is the Financial Times had an analysis of Trump voters and how Trump voters feel about him now, 20 days in, 40 days in, we're now more than 70 days in. And among self-described MAGA voters, Make America Great Again voters, they continue consistently to support everything the president does. It's the other Trump voters, the non-MAGA voters. So say somebody voted for Trump, but they don't describe themselves as MAGA, or aren't rocking the red hats. That's where you're starting to see some weakening in Trump's numbers, especially when it comes to the economy. And those are just the numbers from just last week, without the real impact felt of the stock market the last couple of days of last week. So that's something to watch out here. And that's certainly why you're seeing more and more Republicans on Capitol Hill who have to face midterm elections next year saying, let's pause here, especially on the tariffs, because they've been basically letting the White House do what it wants here on nearly every single issue. And on the tariff thing, on the economy thing, on purposefully bringing about a recession to reinvent the economy around manufacturing, that's where you're starting to see, again, even loyal Republicans who've basically said yes to everything Trump wanted to do so far, say, we need to hit a pause button here and have a conversation. Also, an interesting phenomena happening is you saw a lot of people out there with their signs, oligarchs, that Trump is here to support the billionaires. Notably, if you're looking at the billionaire class, which is the 0.1%, 0.1% of Americans, if you look at the market the past couple of weeks, Jill, most billionaires, actually, if you look at the 10 richest people in the world, most of them Americans, 9 of them have lost billions, tens of billions of dollars. Elon alone has lost $130 billion. Now, that literally, he lost to Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's worth about $130 billion. Elon lost a Warren Buffett of value and is still the richest man in the world at about $300 billion, just to give you context for Elon's wealth. Nonetheless, though, you do have a lot of wealthy people who are like, this lost me a lot of money. In the less wealthy but still millionaire territory is Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports, who also put out a video late last week being like, whoa, 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 what's going on with the tariffs here? So interesting, again, you have sort of grassroots, you have liberals who are coming out, you have some independents coming out, and then you have sort of the, 0.1%, the richest Americans who are like, wait, I thought Trump was going to be good for me here. And so Trump is making the argument, no, I will be good for you long term. This is part of it. I need everyone to be patient with all of this. And I think that's going to be the big question here, watching the markets, watching the tariffs, which is, what is the patience of foreign countries? What is the patience of Republicans on Capitol Hill? And there's a direct line there to the patience of the American people when it comes to the implementation of these tariffs and the impact here.
All right, time for the speed read from Axios, starting with some sad news out of Texas, where a second child with measles has died this year, the third overall death from the virus in 2025. Local officials say the 8-year-old girl was not vaccinated and had no known underlying health conditions. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. visited the family in Texas on Sunday. He said he also spoke with Texas health officials to see how the Health and Human Services Department can better partner with them to control the measles outbreak there. Texas is now officially at 481 measles cases since late January when the outbreak started. Health officials in the state have said they believe that the outbreak will continue for another year. The recent outbreak has now spread to New Mexico, Oklahoma, and possibly Kansas, reaching at least 569 cases overall in the United States as of Friday. Most of the cases are among unvaccinated children and teens. For every 1,000 children that get the measles, 1 or 2 will die, according to the CDC. The 8-year-old girl who recently lost her life was part of that same Mennonite religious community as the 6-year-old who became the first reported measles death in February. That girl was also unvaccinated.
Yeah, and a number of public health officials have been very critical of HHS's responses to the outbreak. That includes the former FDA head of vaccines who was forced out last week. We told you about him, Peter Marks. He said in interviews over the weekend that HHS should be embarrassed by the response here, is not being aggressive enough in ensuring that we get up to the measles vaccine numbers that we were before the outbreak. Remember, we effectively killed domestic outbreaks here back in the year 2000, and it looks like now we're getting to the vaccination point where we're falling below the 97% threshold, enabling these sorts of outbreaks again. On Sunday, Senator Bill Cassidy, he's a Louisiana Republican who happens to be a doctor, he was skeptical of RFK Jr. And actually helped ensure that RFK Jr. got through here. He called on social media for people to be vaccinated and said that top health officials should say so unequivocally before another child dies. But of course, RFK Jr. Lifetime has been very skeptical of a number of vaccines, and specifically the measles vaccine. He says that it's not necessary, or has said that in the past, and even more so, thinks that the vaccine is more harmful than getting the measles itself. And so he's been pushing solutions like vitamin A, but we have seen a number of cases from hospitals in Texas where people are getting toxic levels of vitamin A. They're taking too much vitamin A, and there are questions about how effective that is. Nonetheless, you did have RFK actually travel to the region yesterday. He did put out a tweet where he was talking about traveling down there, talking about their moment of grief, that he's here to support Texas. If you keep going and going, it's a very long tweet. Finally, like the third to last sentence in there is, the most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. So he threw it in there into the tweet. You have to kind of dig in to find that line. And he did have that line in an op-ed piece on Fox.com in early March. The issue that folks have is that he's not out there talking about it. And I should say, Jill, when we had RFK Jr. at the White House for an interview, just over a week ago, one thing his people didn't really want to talk about was the measles. And so that goes against, literally what public health officials are saying, which is, when you have an outbreak like this, you need to be out there, you need to be forthright. We're going to see if this is a turning point now that we now have the third death related to measles.
From USA Today, a federal judge this weekend ordered the Trump administration to immediately make arrangements for the return of a migrant who had legal status here and was mistakenly deported to an El Salvador prison. The judge ordered the man returned home by today. It was part of a wave of deportations last month when Trump invoked the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to send more than 200 alleged gang members to a mega prison in El Salvador. But U.S. District Judge Paula Shaniz this weekend said that Kilmar Abrego Garcia had been illegally deported to El Salvador. The judge said he must be returned by Monday before midnight. The judge saying Garcia was seized without any lawful authority and held without legal basis in direct contravention of U.S. law. She calls his situation a grievous error that shocks the conscience. She says it's because an immigration judge had previously given him protected legal status to stay in the United States because of gang threats that he faces in his home country of El Salvador. Trump officials do admit that deporting him was a, quote, clerical error, but they argue that they're unable to return him because they lack the authority to remove him from that jail in El Salvador.
Yeah, that's despite the fact that the U.S. is paying the president of El Salvador $20,000 per person that they're holding in prison there. But they do note that Abrego Garcia happens to be from El Salvador. Nonetheless, here, the judge really letting the administration have it here in her various rulings. Trump officials now going to the appeals court. So this is a fast-moving situation. They're arguing this district court judge out of line by making these demands. Please back us up by saying, we shouldn't have to return this person to the U.S. So this is yet another immigration-related case that we're going to see escalating through the federal court system. A little background here on Abrego Garcia. He reportedly came to the U.S. illegally at the age of 16 in 2011 after fleeing gang threats in El Salvador. In 2019, he happened to be detained in a store parking lot among several other folks, one of whom said Abrego Garcia was a gang member, made that accusation. We haven't seen any other evidence besides the finger pointing there. He has no criminal record, and the Justice Department hasn't revealed much in the way of evidence, even though the White House has gone so far recently to say, and he's also human trafficking. Again, something the White House is saying, but the Justice Department hasn't offered that accusation, nor any evidence of that accusation, because, of course, in a court of law, you have to argue things ensuring you have backup, because, of course, you have potential perjury accusations if you don't. Now, as far as what happened in 2019, he was put before an immigration judge who said the U.S. does have a right to deport him, just not to El Salvador, his home country, because of the gang threats he faces in El Salvador. So they granted him legal status, literally saying he cannot be deported to El Salvador. Fast forward 6 years, he's been married to an American. He's had a child here in the U.S. And then on March 12th, Abrego Garcia was arrested by immigration authorities who informed him that his status changed. That was inaccurate. They deported him. The White House has defended it, despite what they call, again, the clerical error, and said that he was engaged in human trafficking. He is a member of a gang, and they have no intention of returning him.
And in that Friday hearing where the judge demanded that the administration bring Abrego Garcia back, a Justice Department immigration lawyer admitted that Abrego Garcia should not have been deported. That lawyer, Erez Ruveni, also questioned the government's claim that Abrego Garcia is a member of the MS-13 gang and asked why the government couldn't bring him back to the United States. The remarks were made under questioning. The next day, Ruveni was placed on indefinite administrative leave. He was told that he disobeyed directives. By the way, he's been with the DOJ for 15 years and had recently been promoted.
Yeah, promoted by Trump officials. And praised by Trump officials. But here you have the latest case at the Justice Department of a official pushed out for resisting some directives. They're looking for absolute loyalty from their team here, no matter what. And they didn't like that Ruveni was in court, basically admitting that the government screwed some things up and saying he would dig into it for the judge. Now, if you've ever watched, court proceedings or Law and Order, oftentimes they'll have these candid conversations. But here, they felt that this, wasn't in line with their viewpoint. The White House, the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, have been very clear here that, this guy is a gang member, that he should be deported, and that despite the oversight of sending him to the country that they were explicitly not supposed to send him to, that they have no intention of bringing him back. And I guess they were looking for someone in court who would be more assertive along those lines. Again, this is a complicated case here. An immigration judge did find that he was deportable, but issued that order to protect him from removal to El Salvador. The big question here, and it does not appear that the Trump administration is going to abide by that order to bring him back today, unless some more surprising things happen, is if and when he is returned to the U.S. And is this another case where we see this going to the Supreme Court here? Because again, the White House is arguing that what some of these judges are trying to order them to do, the White House believes is beyond the power of a federal judge and now beyond the power of the White House. So that includes the deportation of 300 or so individuals, where the judge said, like, literally turn those planes around over international airspace. And now this case where they say, well, he's already gone and we can't bring him back.
All right, in lighter news from ESPN, the 2025 NCAA women's champions have been crowned. UConn won its 12th national championship yesterday. The team won 4 championships in a row from 2013 to 2016, but then hit a few roadblocks with tough losses and injuries the past few years. But Sunday, the team pulled through against South Carolina in a rematch of the 2022 NCAA championship game when the South Carolina Gamecocks beat the UConn Huskies. UConn star player Paige Beckers won her first national championship before she is expected to be the WNBA's #1 draft pick on April 14th. Beckers was filled with tears as she buried her face into her coach's shoulder on the sideline when she exited the game with just over a minute left.
Beckers is really remarkable to watch and will be another person who will definitely have quite an impact in WNBA, as they've brought in a number of these stars in recent years, and ratings and interest continue to increase in the league. Here in college, South Carolina was hoping for its second straight championship. The Gamecocks have really crushed things the last couple of years here, but UConn's back to its #1 status again. Now we have the men's championship tonight, and this is set after a couple of really remarkable games. Jill, on Saturday, the Houston Cougars were behind by 14 points at halftime against Duke, but came back in the second half to defeat Duke. So that you have Houston on one end, and then you have Florida, which also came back against Auburn in their Final Four matchup on Saturday on the other side of the court here. So it's going to be a Houston-Florida final. Tip-off is just before 9 p.m. Eastern on CBS or Paramount Plus. So that is the college basketball news that we're watching. Also some NHL headlines over the weekend. Alex Ovechkin of the Washington Capitals finally surpassed Wayne Gretzky's total for all-time NHL goals. He scored his 895th goal on Sunday against the Islanders. Wayne Gretzky, notably, has been following him around, has been traveling as Ovechkin, has been nearing his record, has been rooting him on. Ovechkin said he actually texted him.
I didn't know if he was rooting him on or like heckling him.
No. Wayne Gretzky, first of all, he's the assist guy, but also had this, #1 goals record. No, he's been very good sport about it and has been rooting on Ovechkin and was there as Ovechkin tied his record on Friday, and then was there as Ovechkin surpassed his record. Apparently, Ovechkin said that Gretzky actually texted him, was like, "Can you just get this done already?
I did this already, right? Like I'm tired of going to all of these games. I've had this life. I'm in retirement." And finally, from ABC News, one of our favorite stories from the weekend: 2 nearly 100-year-old tortoises welcomed 4 baby tortoise hatchlings into the world at the Philadelphia Zoo last week. The Philadelphia Zoo announced the arrival of a new generation of Western Santa Cruz Galapagos tortoises. They are the largest living tortoise species and a critically endangered species native to the Santa Cruz Island of Ecuador's Galapagos Islands. It is the first time that the Pennsylvania Zoo has had these Western Santa Cruz Galapagos tortoise hatchlings in over 150 years.
So the hatchling's mother, aptly named Mommy, is the oldest animal at the Philadelphia Zoo. She arrived at the zoo, Jill, in 1932, is estimated to be 97 years old. Again, she arrived at the zoo in 1932. That's the mother, Mommy. Then the father, his name is Abrego. He was moved to the zoo in 2020. He's estimated to be 96. So he is 96. She is 97. The hatchlings so far, of the 4 of them that have hatched, are all female. Notably, Jill, because their parents are respectively, dad is 410 pounds, mom is 280 pounds, the hatchlings will not be spending any time with their parents anytime soon. They likely will not be sharing space with their parents for a very long time, which is sort of sad. I'm sad here for the parents. But they're very worried that, again, the 410-pound father or the 280-pound mother will crush these little hatchlings. So they're taking care of them on the side there. They are monitoring the 12 remaining eggs that were laid by mom for upcoming additional siblings that might be coming out here in the following weeks. And for those of you wondering, like 96, 97, like how old are these tortoises by the standards of like, is this the end of their lives? My answer to you is no. The average Galapagos tortoise lives 200 years. So this is sort of like midlife for them. This is the equivalent, Jill, of having a kid in your 40s as a human being by tortoise standards.
I feel seen, Moshe. The turtles understand me, and I understand them. I knew I liked tortoises.
By the way, it's wild to think like tortoise lifespans, shark lifespans. I mean, we think, it's like that you live multiple centuries. Some of these animals live multiple centuries. It's something. All right, now time for On This Day in History as we celebrate the birthday of the tortoises. I also want to mention here, celebrating birthdays in my family over the weekend on Sunday, actually, so belated happy birthday to my mother, Debbie, who had a birthday yesterday, April 6th, along with my brother-in-law, Scotty, who also is an April 6th birthday. It turns out, Jill, when Alex and I started dating and discovering our family's birthdays, that like half of our families are born in April.
A lot of birthday cake this month.
Yes, birthday cake this month, and then my birthday is next month, and then we have Alex's grandma next month, so we got a lot of birthdays coming up here. All right, a couple items on this day in history. On this day in 1963, American professional golfer Jack Nicklaus, who would go on to become a legend in golf, won the Masters tournament at the age of 23 on this day. On this day in 2001, NASA launched the 2001 Mars Odyssey orbiter. It launched 24 years ago. It is still going around Mars. They believe it has fuel to finish out the year. And so it's given us an incredible amount of imagery, Jill, billions of miles traveled. This has gone around and around and around and around. So Mars Odyssey still going 24 years in here. An important international date to mark today. The Rwandan prime minister on this day in 1993 was assassinated by soldiers. It came days after the deaths of the president of Rwanda, as well as the president of Burundi. It led to this period of anarchy and mass killings that would begin the horrific genocide in Rwanda then in 1993. And on this day in 2022, Ketanji Brown Jackson became the first Black woman on the Supreme Court, confirmed in the Senate on this day in history. One piece of music history on this day, Roxanne.
He went for it.
I tried. The Police released Roxanne, the first single from their debut album on this day in 1978. All right, and finally here, April 7th is National Beer Day. You may ask why. It's because on this day in 1933, low alcoholic beer became legal in the U.S. It was 8 months before Prohibition was repealed. Remember, there was a period of time in American history where we banned all booze. Didn't really work out. And during that period, alcohol was still pretty available, and they actually legalized low alcoholic beer. This day subsequently celebrated as National Beer Day. 8 months later, they would finally lift prohibition and make booze legal again. And so happy National Beer Day to all who celebrate.
Okay, cheers to that. And cheers to all of you guys for listening to this podcast today and every day. Thank you so much. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us in the App Store.
Yes, and buckle up, folks. It's going to be a wild week.
But we're here for you. We'll walk you through it. We've got you covered. And hang in there.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.